Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast here on the PCM Hockey Podcast. Today, we are finally back after a long hiatus of waiting for the new year, and hockey's back, man. It's exciting. We have a new North Division. We got tons of stuff to cover, but I'm going to introduce my guests on the show today. We have Kelvin Hector. How's it going, my man?
It's going well. I'm glad to be back and talking hockey. It's been too long. I can't just rant to myself all the time.
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you on that fact. And Mark over there, the sad, lonely Vancouver fan right now. How are you feeling down there?
Sad and lonely. I don't know if we'd put that, but I'm doing fine. Yeah, there's probably a lot of people that have jumped off the bandwagon, but that seems to go with the territory. So.
You know what? That happens with every other team. I'm pretty sure with all the Canadian teams, we sometimes overreact, even though we start off the year a little rough. We've definitely seen it from the Vancouver fans. We've seen it from the Edmonton fans. We've seen it all from the Calgary fans as well, with some rough starts for most Canadian teams for down in the lower mainland with Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary. But we'll start off today's episode with talking about the Vancouver Canucks that are off to a bit of a rough start to the season. Rough defensive hockey, just not really playing up to the standards, especially Elias Patterson struggling, going 6-10 right now. So we'll just jump right into the conversation. And Mark, how do you think about how the Vancouver Canucks are doing so far in this season?
I think it's a little bit surprising. I know Calvin won't like this, but I just objectively, and it was based on a few things, and we've still got a lot of season left to go. I honestly figured Vancouver would be at the end of the season, they'll be in the top four. The three that I saw on the outside were Toronto, because I figured they wouldn't put it together like so many years they haven't, but maybe this year they do put it together, at least some wins. Calgary and Ottawa. Well, right now, first of all, I don't understand the schedule and how it came down. Like, how does Vancouver have does Calgary have 5 games in hand on Vancouver? It just seems like the schedule maker, I don't know what they were thinking. I know schedules can be really tricky, but for there to be that much of a disparity, I don't understand it. So that being said, that's neither here nor there. I think there's a lot of things going on, and I think the biggest thing is we knew as a Vancouver fan that there were going to be some subtractions. There are some subtractions with Markstrom and Tanev, but personally on both of those, especially Markstrom, I was fine with it because you have to look long term, and with the expansion draft coming, and you can't anchor yourself to any more heavy contracts that. And the fact be told, Markstrom has come up, lame or whatever you want to call it at times, last year in the playoffs, last season, and then also at the end of the season. So personally, I was not that disappointed to see him gone, even though he did a lot of good. But I think there's just some deficiencies. I think, well, first of all, for whatever the reason, I knew Montreal would be good. Vancouver, I thought would be there. And I really can't put my finger on it right now. To be honest, I haven't been, because it isn't my full duties to do hockey. I haven't been able to like tonight. I didn't even get to see the game. I heard it on on the Canucks radio play-by-play, but I really can't put a finger on it, other than obviously, looking purely at the stats. You're giving up. There's been a number of games you're now, 13 goals, minus 13. And the road record, which even though there's no fans, the road record, you lose 3 right now in Toronto. You've lost, I think you lost 2 in a row there in Montreal. That's 5. They've gone 2-8 in the row, and then on the road. And then what's that? 1 in Edmonton and then 2 in Calgary. So those are your 8 losses on the road. I think all that can be hopeful for Vancouver fans is that they can somehow right this, but what do they need to do? One of the goalies has to step up and be the number one. And right now, no goalie, to borrow a bit that I heard on some of the post-game analysis tonight on radio, neither goalie has really stolen a game yet, I don't think, this year. And that's that's something Vancouver was used to all the time. Certainly, probably the last few years.
Yeah, your first point there on the scheduling. I gotta say, the Canadian division, we have had no cancellation, no postponements, but Calgary started off the season with barely playing any games, while Edmonton and Vancouver dropped off to, I gotta say, some of the hottest, not the hottest start, but like the most games. We started off the year with a back-to-back. And then it was just after that, it was just relentlessly you playing games. We didn't see a lot from that from the Calgary Flames. They were one of the teams that didn't play as many games compared to other teams. So Vancouver was faced off against a very hard schedule. And not just that, they did lose a lot of people. And I was even a supporter for the Vancouver Canucks. I thought that with the subtractions, they were going to do good. But the players that needed to jump up, like a Jake Vertanan, like an Adam Gaudette, and like a few other pieces for their depth, needed to jump up. And Braden Holtby to kind of get into that form. He's had a couple of games where he's kind of glistened, but yet his defense really hasn't been there. They lost Travis Hamonic to an injury, which has kind of scratched him out of the lineup. Even Quinn Hughes, yeah, he's putting up points right now, but he's definitely not playing the best defensive game for the Calgary or for the Vancouver Canucks either. Which I'll throw this over to Kelvin on his thoughts on the Vancouver Canucks so far.
Well, I was just gonna comment on the scheduling. Vancouver has the most games played so far throughout the entire league, and it makes sense because, like you were saying, Peyton, there's been no cancellations in the North Division, thankfully, because Canada hasn't really been too out of control with the whole COVID-19 situation. Most provinces have their lockdowns or heavy restrictions anyways, so I wouldn't expect too many players to be catching the COVID bug over here. But I just think it's fatigue for the Canucks, and as you were saying, they lost a couple defensemen, especially Tanev coming to Calgary. Played big minutes for the Canucks. He was a huge role. He blocks a lot of shots. He's a really gritty defenseman. And that helps out your goaltending. So, of course, in turn, they lose Jacob Markstrom. So now Demko's going to be faced with more shots than he's ever seen before. And, of course, Holtby, former Cup champion, leaving Washington and go over to the Canucks. I don't think he's had to face that kind of adversity on defense, as well as Washington's been fairly strong on the defensive end for a while now. Yeah, so it doesn't shock me the Canucks are struggling a bit, and they just keep getting blows here and there, especially losing Hamonic to injury. I mean, they brought him in to basically replace Tanev as one of their top defensemen, and of course can't fend off injuries, but I mean he is prone to being injured every now and again.
Yeah, and that's Travis Hamonic for you. Tonight of the day of this recording here on Monday, we see Niels Höglander take a absolute bullet to the head from Jordy Ben. And as a fellow defenseman myself, I've always learned, and coaches always tell you to keep your shot down. Don't shoot it like you're gonna nail one of your teammates in the face, which is what happened to Höglander there. And what a cut it was. It was an absolute brutal one. But I think the biggest surprise and the biggest disappointment for the Vancouver Canucks this year was Elias Patterson, a player that was kind of supposed to take that huge step up for the Vancouver Canucks and hasn't really taken that step up. Mark, what was your expectations from Patterson, and has he been a bit disappointing for you?
I can't really say, he's being disappointing. I think I'm not going to specifically, and it's not trying to sit on the fence. I honestly can't pinpoint, a specific player right at the moment that I would say, individually they stand out as one that's been disappointing. I think what's so to answer that specific question, no, I think he's shown what he can do. I think the impact is maybe a little bit deeper than what maybe we see on the surface. I mean, I think in terms of, like I say, I stand by, I think the decision had to be made to let Tanev and Markstrom go, because there are too many contracts that Vancouver has that, no movement, no this, no that, and then you're going to land up giving up players that are basically your future, potentially to Seattle, or in these situations, and getting yourself anchored to more things and more money. And I think the problem that's happened is I think some of these guys that were key in the room, and they probably stood tall. I mean, in terms of figure of speech, I think there's now an adjustment period, because these guys that were there and played prominent roles, even just being around the team, are now gone. I mean, yes, Tanev, yes, Markstrom, Stetcher to some degree. And I think the problem is that there's other guys. I mean, that it can't be it's been covered widely. The losing, nobody predicted the flat cap. Nobody predicted everything was going to happen with COVID. And losing to Foley, I know getting to Foley, I was very excited about. Losing to Foley because you basically somehow couldn't make the numbers work. I think that's been demoralizing, because you look at some of these guys like Erickson. I mean, I don't even know when he last played for the team. You've got guys that are just eating up money, and you're getting no benefit out of it. And meanwhile, you've lost. Again, I'm going to pinpoint to Foley, and it's not saying the points he's put up against Vancouver, some of that might be an outlier. I mean, he's kind of gotten sort of on a roll or whatever. I'm just saying his body of work that I saw even when he came in last year, and just his presence and different things he was doing, I just felt we had to find a way to keep him, and we didn't. And I think some of those combination of all those things, loss, if you look at it that way, I think to some degree that might play into a bit of psyche, and the insane number of games. Like, yeah, no Canadian teams have been affected by game losses, thankfully, from COVID. But it's insane. Usually you could see, 12 games played versus 10 games. But as of tonight, I think it's 15 versus 9 or something like that just doing a quick look at the schedule. I don't have it in front of me. There's, a 5-game gap, or 15 to 10, 5-game gap between what Vancouver's played and what Calgary has played. And that to me says something, because if it was a little bit more balanced, you've eaten up all these games, and because you've just been playing game after game after game. So I think it's a combination of things right now. So no, I'm not disappointed with Patterson. I think something could still be done, because the thing about this year, as we all know, is every game, you're basically playing somebody that could take a playoff spot from you. It's not like you're playing Vancouver against the Rangers. It means nothing if you give up points to the Rangers. This is a very different situation this year. So
it is. And go ahead, Calvin.
Jump in. I think, Mark, with the scheduling, I just think the reason why Calgary's the least amount of games. Calgary and Winnipeg both have 11 games played. Calgary had their 5-day break real early in the season, and it's a league mandated thing. So eventually every team will get their 5 days off, and then I think the schedule will balance out a little more.
Right.
Particularly, like I said, the fact Calgary had 3 games. They started off 2-0-1, and then they came back from those 5 days, and they kind of lost. I think it was 3 games in a row. They were on a 3-game losing skid, and now they're kind of hovering around the 500 mark. So, I mean, it kind of hindered the Flames in a way. Yeah, they have less games played, but they haven't been able to find their stride because they had that early break. And every team in the league will get that 5-day break, and we'll see how that kind of balances the schedule, and especially all the jokes going on about games played against Ottawa remaining. Like, the Flames haven't faced off against the Senators yet, so we don't know. We might lose to them. It's very possible, especially if they get strong goaltending from Matt Murray.
And he's been getting better and better.
And then I just have a question, because Vancouver, there seem to be no fit for Jake Vertanen in Vancouver right now. And so there's lots of trade conversation going on. And I'm just curious, Mark, as to what you think will happen with Jake Vertanen in Vancouver, and if maybe Jim Benning, his days are numbered in Coastal City.
Well, a couple things. First of all, your good point. I didn't really catch that Winnipeg had that much of a lesser number of games played too, just looking at the stats. So somehow I saw the Calgary, because I guess, somehow I don't know where I missed that, but fair point about the mandate. As far as Vertanen, I tried to be very patient with him, and neither of you guys would remember. I mean, even for me, it's a bit of ancient history. But going back when Vancouver had a very young Cam Neely, a lot of people tried to say, "Well, Vertanen, give him a chance," because Vancouver used to be back in the 80s very known for the poor management and giving up on players way too early. With Vertanen, and ironically, they've spent money that could have gone towards Toffoli. So the two things kind of tie in here. There was a couple breakdowns I saw of stats and different record of Benning and the group right now that's in place. Yeah, they've done some good drafting, but overall, I think the two go hand in hand, Vertanen and Benning. Vertanen was, I think, the first pick that Benning ever did back in 2014. I think Vertanen's shelf life in Vancouver, and if he goes somewhere, and ultimately I almost have this gut feel, he's going to land up somewhere like Seattle, and he's going to come back to haunt Vancouver in a different way than like Toffoli. I knew once he was gone, he was going to be a good player. Vertanen has underachieved, and I don't know what it is. I think it could be get him out of out of BC, because it just seems he's maybe he's too close to his buddies. I don't know. I don't know what it really is. But it doesn't seem to be working. The problem is, what can you get for him? Maybe you clear some salary. I don't know. As far as it goes with Benning, it's going to be, it would not shock me. Let me put it this way. It would not shock me if he was gone. Brian Burke, when he was in Vancouver, whatever it was, his tenure ended. It's hard to believe it's like 15, 16 years ago now. I remember I was shocked when I heard about that. But that was, that happened, if I recall. I think that was the year the Bertuzzi thing happened. And I think there were a few things that went on there. But it kind of shocked me because I thought he had done a reasonable job. But see, his tenure lasted, if you look at all these guys, it's about a 6-year, 7-year turn. Gillis came in 08, gone by 14. Benning came in 14. Is he maybe done now? And if you roll it back, I mean, it seems to be, for whatever the reason, it's about an 7 to 9 year tenure with Vancouver GMs, and especially the Aquilinis, and I respect them a lot. They've given they gave no leeway or runway to Dave Nonis. He was here. He had 1 year, I think he missed the playoffs, or 1 year he made the playoffs. 1 year there was a lockout, and 1 year he missed the playoffs, and he was gone. And so it's really hard to say, but I would not be shocked. Let's just put it that way. And there's just so many variables right now. I think the biggest thing is the problem is whoever you bring in, you've got to have some kind of direction. And I'm even hearing some rumors out there in social media world that Mike Gillis might land back up as GM here. And I mean, we've seen it before with coaches.
Shirelli. I think Shirelli will land in Vancouver.
Shirelli,
hashtag Shirelli to Vancouver.
I'm hoping not. I really am hoping not.
You get that bandwagon going, Payton.
Yeah, we're gonna get it going. We're gonna destroy the Vancouver Canucks. I hope they sign more bad contracts there.
Yeah,
let's just make Mark despise the Canucks even more.
I think that's not happening. I don't think Chiarelli's good. They've had the whole ex-Boston guy experiment, and doing some digging and reading some stuff out there. I'm starting to see that there was a lot more done by other people in Boston than some of the names that have come up in this conversation, from what I can determine. So in terms of good things, apparently Jeff Gordon in New York, who's now in New York, did a lot of the good things in terms of the moves. He was part of apparently the Boston organization. So, I don't pretend to be an expert on those guys. What I'm saying is, I think Vertanen, again, it's that old thing. What can you get for him? If other teams know what he's like, you got to sell high. And apparently they could have moved him earlier, but Benning stuck with him. And same thing now, if you move Benning, who do you get in here? And it's got to be someone with a good track record. I just don't know. See, he was a rookie GM, and his legacy to some degree is going to be like the likes of the bad contracts to Louis Eriksson, and that's just one that jumps out at me right now.
See, I don't think we could tie in Benning too much, because probably ownership had a lot to deal with the Sedins still playing there and Vancouver still wanting to push for the playoffs. But Jake Vertanen, his ceiling, I think, was pretty high last year when he put up 36 points. But the biggest problem with Vertanen is he is so lazy. He came in to the camp out of shape. He's 6'1" and he's 226 pounds. He's the same size as Milan Lucic, and honestly, he's lacking that dedication out on the ice. Only having 1 goal in 11 games so far this year, just not playing to the way that he should be playing, and it sucks for the Vancouver Canucks, especially drafting him in that 6th overall spot where William Nylander was only 2 spots away. Same with Nikolai Ehlers, and they have been great players for both Toronto and Winnipeg. Jake Vertanen is it's laziness. It really is with Jake Vertanen, and hopefully he is able to turn around, because he does have talent. That's why he was picked at that 6th overall spot. But the same thing with all the rumors, which will be a perfect segue, talking about kind of the same draft year as Sam Bennett, with the whole debacle about not asking for a trade, not the GM not really knowing about the rumors that were going on. So give us the inside scoop, Kelvin, about what's going on with Sam Bennett right now.
Well, so the NBA has their Woj bombs when Adrian Wojnarowski, tweets something about an NBA trade or whatever. Mm-hmm. But I guess hockey has their Freege bombs, because this Bennett wanting out of Calgary wasn't an issue until Elliot Friedman goes on Hockey Night in Canada midway through the Flames game in a second intermission and says that he spoke with Bennett's agent, and the agent said Bennett wants out of Calgary. And I was like, shocked by it. I had to immediately call my dad and be like, did you just see that? Like, are you watching the game right now? And I think a lot of Calgary Flames are caught off guard, and then I read later it even caught management off guard for the Flames, as there was no talks whatsoever, unless they're keeping it behind closed doors and they don't want to say anything. But they came out saying, and there was no talk whatsoever from Bennett or his agent even hinting at the fact that they want out of Calgary. Mm-hmm. So it just caught everyone off guard. And then even more shockingly, then Bennett gets benched. He gets sat for a game, and everyone's like, "Oh gosh, so this is more serious than what it was. It's not just a shrug off." And then to add to even more of this whole Sam Bennett saga, this past game against the Oilers, he slotted into the 4th line center role because Derek Ryan got injured in the 3rd game against Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. And Sam Bennett had one of the best games he's played all season since playoffs. And it's so confusing to figure out if he's trying to do this so his trade stock goes up, so that teams might be more interested in him, or if he's just trying to prove to the organization, hey, I don't actually want out of here, but I just want you guys to realize I'm a better player than I am. Because a lot of the talks say, Andrew Mangiapane passed him, and the younger guys, so like Dylan Dubé, they're getting more ice time. And they're younger than Bennett, but they're just getting more minutes and getting put on those higher lines, and Bennett's unhappy in that sense, and he's getting moved around too much. So it's very confusing, but also interesting to see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, like with Sam Bennett, like you look at his average ice time over his career, it started off really high, and it's just slowly, gradually has gotten lower over the years. Now, Dylan Dubé, with his his first season in, he's already getting some pretty high ice time right now. So for Sam Bennett, it's a bit of you kind of want to change. And I've been hearing, of course, the rumors and tremblings of kind of like not even rumors, just some kind of a hypothesis, I guess, between Sam Bennett and Jake Vertanen. I'll send this off to Mark. Would you do a deal between the Calgary Flames, since it's COVID times and you have to kind of quarantine? Would you take a Sam Bennett for Jake Vertanen trade?
I think I would. I mean, not being up on all the numbers comparatively and things like that, I think if it's just a question of if you move, to try to shake something up, I think it's probably, you potentially could see some upside, I suppose, from a Vancouver standpoint. Well, sorry, did I miss something?
Sorry. I was just laughing a little bit. My teacher just sent me a picture of. Sorry guys, sorry to cut this off. It was a really funny picture. I'll throw it up on the screen now for the listeners watching. Sorry to cut you off there, Mark, but my teacher sent me a little bit of a picture. My news file. I did like a little intro or ending off, and I kicked up my legs and. He took out my Oilers flag and put like an Flames logo, and then instead of my Oilers shirt, he put on a Calgary Flames logo on my shirt, and I thought
that's
that was
a smart instructor. One smart instructor. He knows what he's doing.
He knows what he's doing for sure.
So as far as the Bennett thing, that I think for Vancouver, it could be you got to try to change something. It's going to take, again, this is sort of the unknown quantity. I think Benning he's been very loyal to Vertanen, but that could also be maybe his demise in one respect or another. I think he has to, if that's potential. Often they say where there's smoke, there's fire. If there's that potential to do it, if it could be one across, an even across, just one for one. I would say, just by gut feel, do it. But is Calgary going to want Vertanen? Do they feel he's a reclamation project, or you just make it, Vancouver, Alberta now, which is what the Flames seem to be. They pick up, a backup goalie, they pick up a regular goalie, they pick up a defenseman. Heck, why not add in another player from Vancouver and see if you can, maybe replicate what Vancouver did in the playoffs last year. What the hell, right? So, but my language there, what the heck? So there we go.
I mean, I think, and this could be my Flames bias, but I think there's more question marks around Vertanen than there are Bennett.
Yeah.
Because Bennett's proven if the team makes it to the postseason, Bennett just completely becomes a different Sam Bennett. And that's been the case the last 2 seasons the Flames have made the playoffs. So, I mean, I feel like the Flames might hold off till the deadline and see if they can grab a lot more at the deadline and trade him off to a team who's going to go to the playoffs, because then his stock would be higher. Generally speaking, as you look at it right now, the Vancouver Canucks have a long road to go if they want to get into the top 4 in the North Division. And if the Flames were to do a one across trade, I don't think it would be a one across. I think the Flames would try and add to their draft stock. I don't know what Vancouver has in hand for this upcoming draft, but I could see Bennett and maybe Bennett going to Vancouver and Vancouver sending over Vertanen and maybe a 3rd pick or a 2nd pick. I know we're getting we're getting another 2nd round pick from the Oilers this season, thanks to that Lucic-Neal trade.
Well, it's just a 3rd, so.
Is it a 3rd, not a 2nd?
Yeah, it's a 3rd.
Okay, so, but I see the Flames either trying to go for another 3rd round pick and grab it from Vancouver. That way, maybe have more picks to trade off if they're trying to improve in the offseason or something like that. But I don't think Vancouver is going to get away with a one across trade for Bennett.
No. Yeah, I agree with you on that. Jake Vertanen is a great player, but he's definitely not as proven as Sam Bennett right now. I would have to say, if Sam Bennett, I think if he's given some like good line mates and he's playing a good game, I think Sam Bennett without a doubt is a really, really good player. I always laugh at the analyst from Calgary that said, or it was actually a funny story. Kevin Lowe and McTavish at the time, when they were making the pick for Leon Draisaitl, they picked Leon Draisaitl, and supposedly Berkey and Trevelyan high-fived each other after the Edmonton Oilers made the pick for Leon Draisaitl, which made Kevin Lowe and McTavish, of course, dealt themselves on the pick. Calgary ended up going with Sam Bennett. A Calgary analyst said that Sam Bennett's going to be, without a doubt, better than Leon Draisaitl, and I always laugh because now Sam Bennett, of course, is requesting for a trade out of Calgary, and Leon Draisaitl is one of the leading goal scorers in the NHL, and I always laugh about that. But I did hear Mark was about to say something, so if you'd like to go ahead there.
I agree. I mean, if you compare the two just, without like drilling down and knowing all the exact stats, I say Bennett's, ahead. how much ahead, I don't know. I can't quantify, but he's ahead of Vertanen. So I'll agree with you on that. Just to pick up one other point, Vancouver right now, I mean, okay, just about the comment about Vancouver out of the playoffs. Vancouver right now, mathematically, is 2 points out of a playoff spot. Okay. Now, obviously, there's all these games in hand. There's a lot that's up in the air. There's still, Vancouver still has 40 games ahead of them. They clearly need to right the ship, but they certainly are not out of the playoff picture. I mean, mathematically, because, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of games against each other and that. Mathematically, obviously, there's no team that's out of it. Ottawa's got some work to do, but Vancouver is, I mean, if you take Toronto out of the equation, Vancouver is basically 3 wins behind Montreal. I mean, now there is all these games in hand and all that, and we'll have to see how that all plays out. But just to clarify that, I mean, I don't see it being panic city if Vancouver continues at this trend of whatever they've just done. Whatever they're at right now, 6-10. If at 32 games they're 12-20, well then, yeah, you probably got some more separation there between the teams. But like I say, I'm not going to panic yet. If we get to 30 games or we get to 25 games, another 9 games in, you're basically half the season done, and you're still struggling at .375 as their winning percentage right now. Well, yeah, then Houston, there's a problem basically. So we'll see which we'll see where it goes, but I'm not panicking just yet in terms of, because I mean they still can easily turn this around with obviously again every game has weight, and for example the Calgary series, you pick up a couple wins against Calgary, if they can do it, mathematically they in theory jump up a couple spots, but it's just going to keep moving up and down. So that was my thoughts on that.
And we'll jump on to the next topic, as we're going to be getting on to a bit of a fun one. We got the Battle of Alberta, as we've been long awaiting this one with the Battle of Alberta. And it was a pretty entertaining game between the Flames and the Oilers on Saturday Night Hockey. The Flames ended up winning 6-4. It was a very close game. Oilers absolutely dominating the first period, and the Calgary Flames came flying back. Jacob Markstrom was stellar for the Calgary Flames. And I got to give it, you know what? I doubted Christopher Tanev at the beginning of the season. I didn't think he was going to be as good of a defenseman, but Tanev and Noah Hanifin have been a very big difference maker for the Calgary Flames, especially when they went up against the Edmonton Oilers, as they played a lot of heavy minutes and they were shutting down some pretty high talent. So I'll send us off to Calvin, and he'll give us his thoughts on the Battle of Alberta game there.
I definitely think the Flames proved that they're slow out of the gate, as it's been an issue all season long. It didn't. They scored first, which is unusual, off of Lindholm, and like that just baffled me that we scored first. But then of course they give up a goal, I don't know, really shortly after. I was only half paying attention to the game. I had a lot going on that night, but I'm surprised you said Markstrom had a good game. I think he made some key saves. Of course, you got to shut down McDavid or Draisaitl when they're trying to rush the net or trying to pick the corner. So Markstrom, his size works there. But actually, that was statistic-wise Markstrom's second worst game in the last 5. He only had an .875 save percentage. It's unusual. I mean, he's got, besides the 2 shutouts he has, most games he's getting about 3-ish goals scored on him, 2. So he's averaging about 3 goals a game scored against. So generally speaking, I don't think that was the Flames' best performance, not by far. Their offense showed up, which was great, because I don't think the Flames would have won that game otherwise, even though Edmonton didn't have a strong defensive showing. No. I think if maybe Edmonton had played the defense a little tighter, this would have been a blowout for the Oilers easily. And even though we got the win, I wasn't overly happy with the end result.
Yeah, and I guess I could say the same thing. I actually screamed on my OGR for a bit there, yelling about defense, which has been kind of a huge concern for the Edmonton Oilers. And we would have won this game if we didn't make the mistakes that we made. And this has been a big story for myself, and Dave Tippett has just not been putting the right team out there for the Edmonton Oilers lately with his defensive mistakes, especially Adam Larsson. I've not been liking what Adam Larsson has been doing. He hasn't been looking the greatest. But we have had a couple games against Ottawa, which has saved our record pretty much with a big win against them tonight. Even though we definitely had the depth finally show up, especially in the game a little bit against Calgary, and it's really showed against the Ottawa Senators with that Archibald Ennis and Jujhar Khaira line. It showed up a little bit against the Calgary Flames there with Jujhar showing his physical presence, and same with Josh Archibald, really showing what they could do on the forechecking wise. Also, I got to talk about Kyle Turris on the Edmonton Oilers as well. Every time he gets the puck, the play dies. And it's pretty horrible to say that about a third-line centerman, but we legit don't have a third-line centerman in Edmonton, and I guess you could say that about almost any Canadian team. A lot of teams don't have a good third-line centerman unless you're the Montreal Canadiens or the Toronto Maple Leafs or even the Winnipeg Jets, who just picked up Pierre-Luc Dubois, which just makes that depth on the center absolutely insane, and another scary team to go up against there in the Winnipeg Jets as well. But honestly, it was a back and forth game between Calgary. There was moments where Calgary was absolutely dominating, and then there was moments where the Edmonton Oilers were absolutely dominating. So I'll get on to the next one. What do you think is going to happen in the next game between the Battle of Alberta, which I think what we're going to be doing, ladies and gentlemen, is me and Calvin are thinking about doing a live stream live on my Twitch channel. I'll put the link down in the description below. It's just Payton on the radio. So we're thinking about doing a little bit of a team up where we watch the Oilers game and the Flames game together, and we'll practically just be arguing most of the time. So what do you think is going to be happening in the next Battle of Alberta game? Will it be more intense? Will you see some more physicality from both teams?
I think that'll for sure be a perspective to look at for these upcoming games. I've noticed a lot that since you're playing only 8 other teams, you're playing only so many other teams a lot of times. The first games I've noticed haven't been overly physical. The first time you're facing a team, it's more of a feel-out kind of game, just see what they have. And then, for instance, against Winnipeg, I mean, the first game, we started the season off against them. We lost 4-3 in overtime. Okay, it didn't seem super physical, even though there was bad blood left from the play-in round at the playoffs and all that. But then now we've played Winnipeg 4 times, and each game just kept getting more and more physical. So I think it'll definitely play in as a factor. The Flames will have obviously that one game winning 6-4 against the Oilers, but I think it'll definitely be more of a chess match. I don't think it'll be as high scoring. As for especially the Friday night. It's a back-to-back, so of course they play Friday night and then Saturday on Hockey Night in Canada, and it's just going to be, I think, another high-hitting physical game, but with low scoring, as both teams will tighten up a little bit.
Yeah, and this is a one where you're going to be traveling. You're going to be in Calgary for the first game and then traveling down to Edmonton for the second one. Both really late games. You got to love the late games. Got to love them, where you stay up until 11 p.m. watching the game. But yeah, I think I have to agree with you. I think it's going to be... I think it's going to definitely be a bit more physical after seeing the Ottawa game with 2 fights beginning right off the get-go with Khaira fighting Watson, and then a huge heavyweight bout between Kassian and Gudbranson, which was absolutely amazing to watch as they throw hands. I don't know if Kassian's going to be all right, though. He did not return into the game after that fight. He had a injury, upper body injury. I think it's something to do with his hand or something like that from being thrown around a little bit, and probably smacking his head against Gudbranson's noggin as well probably would hurt his hand pretty good. But I think it's going to be another fun game. I don't know if it's going to be a high-scoring game, but most of the games for the Edmonton Oilers this year have been pretty high goal-scoring games. I think there's only been a couple where the Oilers only scored about maybe, I guess we got our asses handed to us by Montreal. We only scored 1 goal, but most games that Oilers have won or are close, we usually score a decent amount of goals, either 3 to 4 goals per game that I've seen so far from the Edmonton Oilers. So I think it'll be another decent goal scoring one. I think it'll be another close one from what we've seen in the Battle of Alberta. And we'll jump on to probably the last topic, is the two top Canadian division teams, which I think I kind of guessed it right. I did have Edmonton in second, so I kind of guessed that wrong. But Toronto and Montreal. Did you guys, were you expecting Toronto and Montreal to get off to this hot of a start? We'll start off with Mark, and tell us your opinion on how surprised are you with the Montreal and Toronto Maple Leafs?
Well, I'm not surprised, to be honest, with Montreal. As I said earlier, I predicted that Montreal would. I with the changes they made, the additions, like the likes of they're little intangibles to some degree, but adding Toffoli. I guess the Anderson move is. I wasn't an expert on it, but there seemed to be a lot saying that it would pay off. Long and the short of it is, obviously they feasted on Vancouver and racked up a lot of points there. It'll the body of work will be how they do obviously at the end of the whole thing. I'm not surprised about Montreal, Toronto, because there's been so many times where it's, this is the year they'll do it. This is the year they'll do it. And, they've gone eons. I mean, even before Vancouver was in the league is when they last won a cup. So we think, Vancouver fans think, okay, we've never won a cup in 50 plus years. Well, Toronto's gone even longer than that since their last cup. So the fact is, I understand, there's a lot of eager Toronto fans, and they might be able to put it together, but then there you go. They brought in some toughness with Wayne Simmons, and apparently he's now out for 5 to 6 weeks with, I think they said, a broken wrist or whatever. It surprised me a little bit. Again, they feasted. I don't know if, as you would call it statistically, outliers, because they, Toronto's played, 5 games now against Vancouver already, I think.
I think so. Something like that.
So, it'll be interesting to see. I think Montreal somehow, I feel more confident that this is their real deal. Like, they'll be up there in the top, maybe 2 of the four positions. Toronto, I'm going to wait and see. I'm still a little bit surprised about them, and we'll see. One thing that I think could play in for the Eastern teams is if they now have to travel, Toronto, Montreal are going to have to travel, however you do the numbers. You're going to have to play. Now, once you travel west, you've done that, you settle in and whatever, but they're used to doing maybe 2 road trips a year out west. The Western teams, I still think it could be an advantage at some point, possibly, that, the Calgarys, even the Winnipegs, Vancouver, Edmontons, certainly the Alberta, BC teams, that I was thinking it might be a little bit to their advantage, this schedule, because you've got these Eastern teams that aren't used to having to travel so much. You're having to play, 9 games against your Western foes. I think that, to me, is going to could catch up with the likes of a Toronto. I somehow think Montreal is going to be fine, but Toronto has really surprised me.
Calvin, go ahead.
So I think the underlying theme of this is the schedule, and I wouldn't even say it's an unbalanced schedule. I'd classify it more as a teeter-tottering schedule, because I think what we'll see is, as predicted, that the North Division will be super competitive and super close when it comes down the wire. But most teams are still, it's early in the season. We're only a fifth of the way through the season. So it's going to, I'm definitely surprised Montreal is up there. Toronto, not so much, just based on what their opening schedule has been. They've been playing some easier teams in the grand scheme of things. Ottawa on paper, I don't think matches up very well to any of the other North Division teams.
Yep.
So Ottawa is a basement dweller. I think they're going to be there all season long. Yeah, they'll pick out a few games now and again just because teams will be tired and the travel and all that. But then you got teams like Winnipeg and Calgary and I'm not counting Vancouver out necessarily. It's just they've played a lot of games already. But the schedule will teeter-totter. Eventually, teams like Calgary will play Ottawa more, get more wins, and then it'll just become all the more important when you're playing teams like Toronto and Montreal to get at least half of the wins the times you're facing them. And I think that's what it's going to come down to. It's not you're going to have to look at each team individually and be like, okay, we need to get at least 4 wins against this team. We need to get at least 5 wins against this team. And that's how I think most of these North Division teams are looking at it. They're not looking at, okay, by the end of the season, we want this many points. They're looking at it in a win perspective. And Montreal so far is doing a great job. They played well in the play-in round against, I forget what team they knocked out, but they upset them.
Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, right? Like, and then it just kind of left a lot of questions. Well, if Montreal played this well in the playoffs, what are they going to look like next season? And they just kept adding to their team. And Carey Price, obviously, and adding Jake Allen, I think, was huge. The goaltending has been spectacular for Montreal.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. The Flames, they played great in that 2-0 win against Montreal. But, like, Jake Allen stood on his head. And Markstrom, if he hadn't stood on his head, I don't think the Flames would have come away in that game with the win. So I think a lot of factors play into the schedule, and I mean, I'm not shocked to see where the teams are as of now, and I think there'll be a lot more movement in maybe like 2 weeks, 3 weeks time.
If I can just jump in with one additional thought there, guys. The other thing that's going to be interesting is this year. I mean, okay, Ottawa mathematically is still there, but realistically, I figured there'd be six Canadian teams that are going to be fighting for it all the way through. Regardless, you've got 3 Canadian teams that any other year, all 7 teams, well, maybe not Ottawa right now with the way they're playing, 6 Canadian teams could make it to the playoffs. You're going to have 2 good teams. You know, even if Vancouver, unless their season continues atrocious, you're going to have 2 teams that are going to miss the playoffs. There's going to be 2 Canadian teams that will miss. There's no way to avoid that. This is unlike where, say, last year where, you know, you had a horrible LA team or Anaheim in a rebuild where you're playing them and you're racking up points against them. That's the other thing this year that's going to be, you're going to be playing the way this division is and where every team is sitting in their development phase or whatever you want to call it. There's going to be, you know, they're playing tough teams every night. You know, Vancouver is not really living up to the tough bill right now, but I think you get what I'm saying. So.
Yeah, and that's right on the spot for that because, I mean, you look at it, Edmonton, Vancouver, and Calgary were all facing those. It was one of the weakest divisions in the NHL in the Pacific Division, right? Like Edmonton Oilers were looking like a godsend last year. And now this year playing against some pretty tough teams in Toronto and Montreal and Winnipeg, it seems like the defense have kind of dropped off the ball, but I think that's because we lost Oscar Klefbom. But yeah, I gotta say I've been not really surprised about Montreal. I said that they were gonna do very good, but I didn't expect them to be this good and especially that good defensively with adding Ben Sherratt, who's been absolutely terrific, and not just that, Josh Anderson, who a lot of people thought was going to be a bad pickup for the Montreal Canadiens, have actually turned out to be an absolute steal for them and has been playing great alongside Duran. And in Toronto, it sucks that they've been losing some players to injuries with Thornton being out and Campbell, and now you have Wayne Simmons out for a while now too. It seems like the injuries are starting to hit the Toronto Maple Leafs a little bit. We'll have to see if they're able to sort of recover from a lot of these depth injuries, losing Thornton and losing Simmons. Will that depth that they kind of put together, will that help them go through this year, especially losing Wayne Simmons, who has been a big player for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But that is about it for the comeback episode, episode 5 of the PCM Hockey Podcast. Thank you guys very much for being on here. We'll end it off with your guys' final words. Mark, we'll send it off to you first. Do you have any final words for the episode?
Great to be back. I mean, I think it's going to be, you know, and full credit to Calgary and you know, Markstrom so far doing well. I think it's going to be just interesting to see, like I say, I mean, what are we at here? I was looking at last year's schedule, so I don't have it up in front of me. I'm just going to quickly switch back to this year. If we're 16 games in for Vancouver, here we are. I think it's going to be interesting to see if there's somehow a little bit more parity or what am I trying to say? When Vancouver gets to, say, 25 games,
it's going to be interesting to see where they are at in comparison. Are they still going to be trending at, under, 400 hockey at 375 right now, or are they going to turn things around? So I think it's going to be interesting to see how the teams change in there. Will Toronto drop? Will Montreal stay where they're at? That's where it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
And Calvin, off to you with your final thoughts.
Well, I honestly just hope that we can brag North Division goes through the entire season without any COVID scares, knock on wood. As many of the other divisions and teams have been having issues, canceled games, postponed games, players put on the COVID list. So I hope the health continues in our division, and just to see the competitiveness in every team. I mean, even though the standings that we've been talking about this entire pod are so all over the place, most games have been fairly competitive. There's been the odd blowout, but the North Division, as far as I know, unless the stats change, is one of the highest scoring division in the league. So you got lots of goals, you get lots of entertaining games, and I'm just excited hockey's back, and it's great to see this kind of one-off season, and anything can happen.
Yeah, hockey is back, and also people for getting all worried about the COVID list and stuff like that growing and growing. NFL had the same problem at the start of their year and also midway through their year as well, where they had tons of COVID cases, but they were able to continue their schedule and have the Super Bowl the day that they wanted it to happen. So I think the NHL will just be fine, and they'll work out on the scheduling. And when the teams come back, I'm pretty sure they'll just be playing the same amount of games that everyone else has had. So we're going to end this episode here. Thank you guys for jumping on. I'm glad the podcast is back. We should be recording another episode next weekend, talking about what's going to be going on throughout this week. So I'm going to end things here, guys. Thank you guys for tuning in, for listening, whatever you're doing. And we'll see you guys all later. Adios, amigos.